Hi, and welcome to this video in which we look at exporting data from QPSMR so that it can be used in other systems or other software. So I've got a project open here. It's got approximately 15 different questions, and we're going to look at how we can export both the texts from this project and the data so that it can be used elsewhere. So we click on the data menu and click on the export menu, and you can see there's two options. One is to export to Reflect. Now Reflect is a free piece of software that works just like QPSMR Insight, in that you can just do tables from a project you've already processed in QPSMR. It's free to use, so it doesn't need a license. You can just use it freely. So it's ideal as a way of distributing projects to colleagues or clients, so that you can do all that you can do in the tables within Reflect, but you can't actually enter data, change data, or set up your questionnaire. And all the other exports are covered down the export menu. So exporting to Reflect is pretty much the same as any of the others. So I'm going to go to the other menu first. And the first thing we're prompted for is confirmation of the data file. So we're going to open up data.ask. And you can see that a menu pops up with different output options that we can choose. If we'd chosen Reflect, that one would have been the one that it was selected. We didn't, we've gone down the other. So that's for selecting Reflect. The principles for exporting are the same for every piece of software, so just taking you through the others here will certainly suffice. So one of the options, and this sounds like a strange thing you might want to do, is exporting a project back to QPSMR Insight. So there are times when perhaps you've got a project and you want to pass some of that project on to the next wave of a project, for example. So you might just export the common questions so that when you pick up the next wave's data, you could add to that with perhaps a slightly different or amended questionnaire. The other exports probably more commonly used. The first one on the next one on the list is the XML export. Now XSS is a standard that's used throughout market research, and it's a way to move data and all the project texts to another software platform. I think there's about 50 different software packages used in market research that support the XSS standard. So in theory, you should be able to just export your project from one of those 50 and read it back into one of those 50, and you'll get all of your text carried through correctly. So this is a way of transferring a project using XSS. Some of those suppliers of software haven't kept up with some of the more recent versions, so if perhaps they've only done an import from version 1 to version 1.1 of a XSS XML, you'd have to select that option there rather than the more recent 2.0. So you can choose which of the XSS options that you want there if you want to export to XSS. You'll see some options over here that are available. One that particularly is useful is spread field multi-coded. That's worth passing comment on. There's two ways of exporting multi-response questions, and the efficiency will vary from project to project. By default, you will export a field for every single response in a multi-coded question. So let's say you've got a brand list of 50 brands for a particular question. When you export that, that will become 50 fields. Now that could make the file very, very big, particularly if you've got several questions using that brand list, or if the brand list is perhaps runs to 2,000 or 3,000 different brands. So another way of outputting that data is using a spread field. And what that does is it stores the data with just the codes that are present and allowing as many codes as are needed. So for example, if someone picked brands 1, 3 and 5, it would just output 1, 3 and 5 for that respondent, rather than outputting lots of 1s and 0s for all the brands that it didn't have, a 1 for the brands it did have and a 0 for the ones that it didn't. So it can be an efficient way of packing down data that has a high number of large multi-response questions. And if you want that option, you can just check that box there and it will do what I've just described. The next option on the list is TXXE. That's just an extended version of SSS, so it carries over some more controls that some people have written packages to read more of the controls than what you might call the base version of SSS carries forward. And now you've got SPSS on the list, so that's the one down here. Again, you can handle spread fields more efficiently if you've got big multiple response questions. SPSS 12 to 16, actually I think SPSS is now up into the 20th version, but actually the output is exactly the same as it always was, so you can just use one of these old versions and it'll be totally compatible with the current version of SPSS. When you read it into SPSS, there's two types of common files that SPSS uses for importing. It doesn't output a SAD file here so that you can open it directly within SPSS. A SAD file contains all the text and all the data within one file. What comes out of QPS are two files, and you can see their names here, an SPS file and a text file. The text file contains the data and the SPS file contains effectively all the instructions and all of the texts applicable to all the questions. So when you open up SPSS, you'll need to open up that SPSS file and run it, and you will then be able to make a SAD file, which is the more common way of saving an SPSS data file and project. The next on the list is a SAS file, so that will make a SAS file and a TXT file so that you can open that in SAS. Similarly, if you want to use it in Quantum, you can get a run file and an ASCII data file, and that then should be able to be opened and used within Quantum. And now the last three on the list are slightly different. These will just give you data without any of the text for the questions. You can get a heading for each of the fields so you know what's in each field, and you can also use the spread field option here as well. But all you'll get is the data here. You won't actually get any text carried forward. You'll need to know when code 1 and code 2 are output, for example, that code 1 means yes and code 2 means no. There will be no annotation within the output data to tell you what those 1s and 2s are. Consequently, somebody taking the data to use that data would need to have a map or some other lookup or book to understand what all the codes mean if it wasn't obvious. And that's the same here for these two. When you output ASCII, either as a long ASCII record that starts at position 1 and goes as long as the data file requires, or you can also store data in blocks of 84 older types of software. So that lets us output our data. So let's look at doing a SSS one and just running that. Click on SSS. I'm not going to choose the options over here. I click OK, and you can see now that it's going to make me a file called example_project, which is the name of my QDF, sss.asc, and it should have made that. And if I go now to the folder in which I'm working, you'll see that I've now got an XML file. If I open and enter, there's my SSS file, and that's a standard SSS file that should be able to be read by all of the packages that subscribe to that SSS standard. You can find more out about SSS, and there's the website address there, www.triple-s.org, will give you more details. So that's put all the texts into a file that can be imported elsewhere, and the data file is the ASC file, which is referenced in that XML file, so that the whole project should be read in correctly in another system. So that's looking at exports from running an export. That one was to SSS in that occasion. The others go through the same procedure. Now, there's at times when you export that you don't actually want to export everything for your project. So if we open up again, we can actually make what's called a DTV file. Now, a DTV file is a list of all your variables that you can then edit so that you don't just export everything as it stands. So let's just make a DTV file, and I can give it any name I want to. I could call it my DTV.dtv. So that's made that file. I can close this now, go to the folder where I was working, and I've now got this file called my DTV.dtv, and that's a file that I can now edit so that I can control exactly what's exported to the export of my choice. So maybe I don't want to see that variable, but I want to have gender and region as the first two variables. So if I wanted to, I could move those, push them to the top, and that will put those to the top. Let's say I want question 15 at the top, because that's an important question. I can just move that to the top. Maybe I want to hide questions 12A to 12G from the recipient of the data. I can just remove them. All these things over the right hand side here tell you what type of variable it is, and if you were to output to an ASCII layout, where the data would end up in the data record. That won't be true now that I've moved the order, but it would have been true before I changed the order. Now that I've made my amendments to my DTV file, I've moved gender, region and question 15 to the top, and I've removed question 12, I can save that, and if I go back and do an export now, let's open up this file again, and let's select that DTV file. I must remember to select it, pick my DTV file, click OK, and let's export to SSS just once more. And I'm going to overwrite the one that I did before. And now if we open up this XML file, we should find that gender, region and question 15 are at the top. And if I was to scroll down, you'll find that question 12 has disappeared. So we get to question 10, 11, and you can see here that question 12 has now disappeared. So that's been a successful export using a DTV file. And of course you can reuse that DTV file if you're regularly exporting data on a weekly or monthly basis. You can preserve a DTV file and just run it again every time that you've got to output the data for a client or to do something in another piece of software. Alright, so let's now look at other things that we can do. That's the main way of doing what you might call a data export. Another way of getting data out of QPSMR Insight is to list data to a CSV file, and that gives you some extra options. So if we go to the data menu again and we go to list data, you'll see another menu pops up here, and this menu will allow you to output particular fields to a CSV file, and if you want to, you can filter it as well. So we could here just choose females, for example. I could apply a filter here of people who were female in the survey, and I could select just particular questions. If you want a CSV file, you check that. If you don't put that, you'll just get a listing, which probably isn't so useful, but a CSV file is probably the main one you want. So let's say I want to output gender, region, question 3 and question 10. If I want to check this box, I'll actually get the text for those questions. If I don't check this box, I'll get the codes. But let's say I want to see the texts on this occasion. So I'm going to check that. I'm not going to choose a filter. If you want a filter, it's just like selecting a filter within the main part of QPS for tables or for filters on questions. I'm going to run that list now, and you can see that I've got out a file here of all of the responses to those particular questions. And if I want to preserve that, I can just preserve that file, close it, return to my folder, and here's my listing that I got in our data report.csv. And you can see now I've got a listing of all of my respondents. I've got their serial number, their gender, their region, what they gave at question 3, and an answer at question 10. Now, if I hadn't checked the box asking for text, I would have just got codes here, which of course might have been useful. But this could be quite a useful tool for getting data out that either you want to send information to clients, for example, or sometimes this could be useful for checking tables so that you can sort in Excel, do some sums in Excel, or some functions in Excel to check figures that are coming out or give people quick counts. So that completes this video on exporting data from QPSMR Insight. Thank you.